good evening. Let us start this March 2025 edition of this monthly lecture from the Partha S Ghosh Academy of Leadership, IIT Kharagpur. I would request Professor Manav Kumar Das, the chairman of this academy, to give his welcome address first.
Thank you, Dr. Khan. We are delighted to welcome to an insightful lecture featuring two distinguished thought leaders on the invention of innovation, Dr. Richard M. Foster, Managing Partner, Mill Group Management Group LLC, and former Senior Partner at McKinsey and Company, and Dr. Partha S Ghosh, Strategic Problem Solver, futurist, philosopher, and policy advisor, former partner of McKinsey and Company. Let me introduce briefly about Dr. Partha Ghosh. Dr. Ghosh is a distinguished alumnus of Indian Institute of Technology, Kharagpur. Dr. Ghosh is a world-renowned thought leader, philosopher, problem solver, futurist, and inspirer in the field of business and technology, government, and public service. He is known as a modern-day Renaissance man. He has served and inspired leaders of businesses, multinationals, and governments on significant strategic and organizational issues. His clients view him as a creative problem solver and a visionary leader. Dr. Ghosh has delivered more than 200 plus keynote addresses in various leadership forums on strategy, innovation, nation building, leadership, and knowledge economy 2.0. He has developed a full spectrum of advanced courses in economics, globalization, management consulting, and creative problem solving and strategy at the Tufts Gordon Institute, and earlier innovation management at the Fletcher School of Leadership at MIT. He has two advanced engineering MS and management MBA degrees from Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He did his undergraduate work at Indian Institute of Technology, Kharagpur. An avid public servant, is one of the founder members of the Boston Pledge and is involved with multiple philanthropic initiatives around the world. A new school, first of the kind, Partha Ghosh Academy of Leadership, is being established at the Indian Institute of Technology in Kharagpur. The school integrates Eastern and Western wisdom to provide young students as well as senior executives with the opportunity to uncover their inner powers to influence positive outcomes in society. With this brief introduction, I request Dr. Partha Ghosh to kindly give an introduction of Dr. Foster and take this discussions further. Dr. Partha Ghosh.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning to everyone in the United States, and good afternoon to those who have joined from Europe, and good evening to everyone in Asia. It is a very, very special privilege to have a very good friend of mine whom I have learned from, worked with over 4 decades, which I don't believe how quickly time has passed, Dr. Richard Foster, who is indeed a distinguished thought leader, innovation advocate, above all, always youthful, and always trying to explore new frontiers of life. But before I introduce Dick, I call him Dick, known in the world as Dr. Richard Foster, but some of us who are very close to him have called him Dick for ages. But before I introduce Dick, I would like to spend some time, as the chairman has requested, to introduce the Academy. Many of you know about the Academy. Some of you have joined for the first time. I think it is proper that we talk about the Academy a little bit, and then I want to really introduce our great speaker, Dr. Richard Foster. Now, just to give you the backdrop, you know, the academy was conceived to bring forward a leadership movement, a movement which will bring together the thoughts from the Eastern and the Western hemispheres so that we could indeed create a model where leaders are those individuals who can lift others, not lift themselves, and in the process, lift the beauty and the truthfulness of our society. Now, I, like Dick, having had the privilege to serve and work with leaders in the corporate and governments in more than 36 nations, I do believe our civilization is in a serious crisis, perhaps at an inflection point, in a state of flux, affected by multiple tensions all across geopolitical, which we are facing right now, geoeconomics, climate, human migration, wealth gap, while we have been flooded with fantastic technologies all around us, gene editing, artificial intelligence, space travel, electric vehicles, you name it. We have all kind of tools, but yet we are in a kind of a mess. Now, so we ask ourselves, what is the reason where we are? And it is I do believe there are two fundamental equations that has shaped the modern society. One is Adam Smith's power of self-interest and Herbert Spencer's, inspired by Charles Darwin, the survival of the fittest. The world has been drawn into a zero-sum game because survival of the fittest and the power of self-interest, when they collide, it helps people to become selfish. In the process, society has become self-centered, ethics have been compromised, and as we all know, there has been a lack of balance of three E's: the ecology, equality, and ethics. So I do believe, and many of us believe, we have to switch from what we are calling a zero-sum game to a plus-sum game. And we need a leadership model which can inspire the synergies of talent across the world, and in the process, create a spirit of, I would call it, inventing and innovating new frontiers. In that spirit, what we'll hear from Dick would be extremely important because it is always been our goal to have great thought leaders from all over the world come together in this platform at the Academy of Leadership to literally inspire new thoughts, new ways of living, new ways of leading, and in the process create a greater society, greater civilization. Yesterday, last night actually, Boston time, we had a fantastic session called Transhumanism. It was at the Tufts University, and we had a fantastic thoughts of what are the new opportunities which are opening up as AI, AR, VR, gene editing, nanomaterials, metamaterials come together. And that has only been possible because people like Dick, who has continuously inspired the corporate world around the world to think of innovation, think of how to explore new frontiers. And I believe that is ultimate goal of a leader, helping people to see new possibilities and in the process create a great world. So we are indeed honored to have Dick Foster. As I mentioned, he's a great friend first, but just to introduce him formally, currently he's the managing partner of General Medical Networks. Though he has worked for 5 decades, he's extremely active in several companies. He has also been the chairman of Pana Care. He has been involved a whole spectrum of companies. But we two met. I still remember the first time when I met Dick. We were part of a practice in McKinsey called the chemical practice. And I was the youngest member, Art Shivas, if you remember, Dick,
Yep.
Peter Wood, and you and I were in that meeting. It was 9 o'clock in the morning in the New York office. And after I was asked to pull together some charts. After I shared the chart, Dick said, Partha, great work, but you should have begun where you ended. There's a big message. You should have begun where you ended, because I ended with what are the critical issues the chemical industry leaders have to deal with. And Dick is a person who believes in inductive logic as opposed to deductive logic. And it's a very important point in innovation, that you have to have hypotheses as to how you want to create the future, and then you test and you create the future. It's a very important point which I learned about 4.5 decades in 1977 in the month of September, I think, in Peter Wood's office. Dick Foster just became a partner. Peter Wood was a senior partner, and his colleague Art Shivas and myself. I still remember that day. But since then, Dick has continued to inspire us. I was with him in the innovation practice, technology management practice, and every time he interfaced with us, he demonstrated three things. First, his attention to perfection, his belief in the future. Third, his belief in the S curve. He believes we are at the point of discontinuity. There's always the next S curve. And that inspired two books, and I'll finish there. One is called the famous book, The Attacker's Advantage, 1986. Much before Christensen and others started talking about S curves, Dick looked into the S curve. What is S curve, and how do we transition from one S curve to the other S curve? We all worked with Dick to make that happen, and it did happen. And the second book that he wrote is Creative Destruction, which was published in 2001. And you should all know that he was also elected as a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 2008. So we are indeed very honored, Dick, to have you within us, to inspire us, and in the process take the spirit of academy and the IIT Kharagpur forward. We need the great thought leaders to shape the future. With that, Dick, I pass it on to you.
Thank you very much, Partha. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, good. Thank you. Thank you very much, Partha. And it's been my honor to be a friend of yours for so long. And we're just getting started. So we have another 40 years ahead of us here. So this will be the first day of those 40 years. I'm going to talk about my interpretation of the history of the concept of creativity. Can you all see the slides at this point? The slide?
Yes.
You see a woman behind a bar. So
Yes.
we're gonna explore this concept in some depth, but we're gonna first of all. Oh, come on now. You're sharing your screen. So
No,
for some.
No, we see your screen.
Yeah, there we go. So we're going to talk about a brief history of the concept of creativity, because we could go on for decades, but we'll only go on for a few minutes. And then we're going to talk about mostly Western. Because I have tried, and I'm still trying to do the history of creativity in China. It is a very difficult area to probe, because there's so little written about it. But we won't talk about China right now. I can answer questions about China if you'd like. So where do we start? What is creativity? Creativity is the magic of the near possible. So we're not talking about how can we create new Earth orbiting colonies of people or something like that. We're talking about the near possible. What can we do in the next year or two, or maybe 5, that is really important? Next question is, can I do it? It's fine to sit around and have ideas, but if you can't do it, it doesn't make any sense. How can I do it better? Is another very important question, which we'll talk a bit about today. So we'll start with creativity. This is not creativity, for sure. And many people's ideas of creativity is this, but it's not my idea. Creativity. Creativity is something elegant and simple. So I'll start with a little bit of history, because creative expression has been core to the human spirit since the earliest times. What do I mean by the earliest times? Well, we can start in the Sibiru Cave in South Africa with insect repellent bedding from 77,000 BC. It was pretty impressive. This is an image of that bedding that was found in some clay tablets, which then solidified and allowed us to see them. Another one is the first musical instruments that I know about, which are 42,000 years ago, found in Germany. And some images on walls, cave paintings from El Castillo, Spain, in 41,000. So creativity goes way, way back, at least to these dates, most probably well before these dates. Creativity thrives on association. Creativity is associating two ideas in a useful way that have never been associated before. Here's an example. Here's an old example that I'm aware of. It's called the Lion Man of Hohenstein-Stadel. And this fellow has the head of a lion, as you can see, and the body of a human. It was constructed in 40,000 BC. So people were thinking about associating previously unassociated ideas of a human body with a lion head a very long time ago. Skipping forward by 30,000 years or so, there were three people who really in Greece got the whole thinking of these kinds of issues together. First was Parmenides in 500 BC or so, then Plato 100 years later, and then Aristotle 100 years after that. And what did they do? What did they stimulated other people's creativity. So here is an example. This is the Archimedes screw, which was invented in 287 BC. So this is really quite an old idea, this idea of creativity. Then there was the Antikythera mechanism, which was 100 years BC, and this was also Greece. This is a device that was made in 100 BC. You can see its complexity. It gives us insight into the mind of very good engineers and boatsmen, by the way, because this was used to calculate where you were on the Mediterranean. 100 years BC. It's used to calculate the position and predict eclipses. So it was both a navigation device and an astrology device. And the months and days came from the Sothic Egyptian calendar, with leap years included, by the way. So this is very sophisticated. And we went on from there. And many people were convinced that creativity was quite important, but not everyone. So if we go forward several 1,500 years, Paul Gauguin wrote this book about the importance of gravity. And he said, for the 17th century Jesuits, the purpose of mathematics was to construct the world as a fixed and eternally unchanging place. So this is just, 500 years ago or so, in which order and hierarchy could never be challenged. Order and hierarchy could never be challenged. That is not the world of today. So if we go forward and say, okay, how did we get out of that dilemma? We can see the first signs of change around 1500 or so. There are some examples in the 1400s and then more examples in the 1600s, but 1500 is not a bad place to start. Leonardo was of that generation, and you all know about Leonardo and his magnificent and voluminous works. Michelangelo, a little bit later, and all the things he contributed, and then Shakespeare, just a little bit later. So this was a century of enormous creativity led by three extraordinary individuals. So it really is, in some ways, the starting point. And we see that reflected in our language. Science is a word that had its origins in the 14th century. Create was another 14th century word. Innovation was a 15th century word. Scientific was coined in 1589. Creative, 100 years later, in 1678. Disruption, creative destruction, so the word disruption in 1793. So that's where it really started to take off. William Duff, in fact, an Englishman, developed a theory of genius, and he talked about the imagination, judgment, and taste rather than divine inspiration. So we were still breaking away from the divine notion of the world into a more pragmatic, human-centered notion of the world. In the 19th century, things really began to change rapidly. And this is a image of the charge line of the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. And it wasn't limited to war. There were advances in other many diverse fields. De Maupassant invented the short story, which had never existed before. Verdi and Wagner were composing their symphonies in the early 1800s. Bruckner, Mahler, Sibelius, and Satie were rising in their spectacular fashion. Gall explained where speech is in the brain. This was in the early 19th century, where speech is in the brain. Quite extraordinary, I think. Niepce created the permanent photographic image in the early 1800s. Darwin described evolution. Maxwell explained electromagnetism. Cauchy developed number theory, and Freud defined psychoanalysis. The 19th century was an incredible century of innovation, and I think in many ways it's where we're all the descendants and we're all the beneficiaries of all the great work that these people did at that time. So what actually happens here? You start with the data, and you need to create a narrative out of the data. That's something that all of you, my life is around. Gee, I have all these numbers and these facts. How can I make a story out of that? So creating the narrative from the data is a very important first step in creativity. Then using that narrative to find new data and new insights, and then keeping that cycle going. That's essentially what's going on. And we are in the blossoming time of it right now with AI and all the advances that are yet to come, which are truly extraordinary. This process of creating a narrative from the data is called abduction. Everybody talks about induction, which is figuring out an answer, but you have to create the narrative first, and that first step is called abduction. So it's a very useful word, and it's forcing associations between data and their meanings, and that's an essential part of the creative process. Creativity, at least in my mind, is the art and science of the near possible. I don't want to be creative about something 100 years from now. I want to be creative about something in a year from now or 5 years from now, but probably not too much more than that. Now we do have all kinds of things going on that are much farther out than this, but the great bulk of what we're focused on, particularly AI, is in the near possible. This word creativity was first made it into Webster's dictionary in 1875. So even though creativity had been going on for a long time, the word had never been coined. It took until 1875 to coin that word. And what it means is to associate previously unassociated fields. And that's the essence of creativity. And that's what all of our jobs are, to associate previously unassociated fields. And we'll talk about that. The point, and that's the point at which value is created. Once you make that association, you're at the beginning of the creation of value. And that's the most important economic function in the world and will remain so. So, and that's all about mastering the arts of the near possible, not something that can be wonderful 50 years from now, although people do think about those things. And AI certainly got started 50 years before anything practical came out of it. So that beginning is possible. But for most of us, we want to master the arts of the near possible. For example, not too many years back, nobody ever said, I need a laser. And then all of a sudden we had lasers. Nobody's ever said, I need a drone. But now we have drones. Nobody said, I need a latent Dirichlet algorithm. They're wonderfully useful, and we use them whether we know it or not all the time. And molecular machines. I mean, that almost sounds like an oxymoron. How can you have a molecule and a machine? And the fact of the matter is, we have many of them now. These all came from mastering the arts of the near possible. And you can argue about whether near means 5 years or 10 years, but it's the art of the near possible. And we're right in the middle of it now with AI. This is all subject to the Russell condition, coined by Bertrand Russell, who was a leading thinker in the last century. The greatest challenge to any thinker is stating the problem in a way that will allow its solution. You just can't state a problem. You have to state the problem. It's the art of stating the problem in a way that allows it to be solved. And that's a great art, and it's something that all of you, I'm sure, are involved in all the time. Then William James, a great writer, expanded on it a little bit later in the 19th century in The Will to Believe. He said, instead of thoughts of concrete things patiently following one another in a beaten track of habitual suggestion, in other words, no change, we have the most abrupt crosscuts and transitions from one idea to the other, rarefied abstractions and discriminations, unheard of combinations of elements, the subtlest associations of analogy. In a word, we seem suddenly introduced into a seething cauldron of ideas, where everything is fizzling and bobbling about in a state of bewildering activities, where partnerships can be joined and loosened in an instant, treadmill routine is unknown, and the unexpected seems the only law. That's the process of creativity. That's what we have to get used to. It is the opposite of the production process, which has to be totally predictable, totally reliable, always runs the same way. This is just the opposite of that process. This is not Aristotle. This process is not Aristotle, as we saw the derivation. So the question comes before us: why am I so productive? Herman von Helmholtz asked this question in the 19th century, and Henri Poincaré carried on with it a little bit later and into the 20th century. And bringing together their ideas was Graham Wallas, who was a Brit and wrote around the turn of the century. And he wrote a book, which I recommend to all of you. It's very hard to find, but it is findable, called The Art of Thought by Graham Wallas. It's about 150 pages. It's a pretty good read. You'll find the language a little bit outdated, but it's a pretty good read. And he brings all these ideas together. So this is where the modern idea of creativity really got its start. And he said there are 3 stages to the art of creativity: preparation, incubation, and illumination. So these are the 3 things that we're all involved in, whether we know it or not. I think it's helpful to know what these stages are, so you can ask yourself, what stage am I in? Where am I going? So these are the 3 key stages of it. It's all about bisociation, relating 2 previously unassociated ideas. This is Arthur Koestler, who wrote about it in the early 19th century. And if you don't know Koestler's work, I recommend that you get some of his books. We don't have time to talk about it all today. This is Santiago Calatrava, and he was completely fascinated by this whole idea of associating previously unassociated ideas. So he started with notions of the human skeleton and insects, and he wondered what you could make out of those. And he looked at insect wings and said, what's the use of that? And then he came up with all kinds of new fabrics and materials and equations that he used, mathematics he used to characterize all of these things. A tremendously creative fellow. Another way to trigger these associations is to use a muse. Muses were the 9 daughters of Zeus and Mnemosyne, which is Greek for memory. And these muses were common in Greek, Roman, and Indian cultures, as you undoubtedly know. They inspire creation, songs, dance, poetry, through stimulated association. So someone who doesn't have the idea, but stimulates your ideas, you want to find out who are your muses and use them well. Today it means triggering another's imagination. The muses aren't necessarily creative themselves, but they stimulate that creative impulse. Very, very useful. And muses catalyze creativity. That's the key message. And what is that creativity? Genius, as Nabokov said, is finding the invisible link between three things, between these things. We know Nabokov as a famous writer, but he was also a lepidopterist. He was fascinated by butterflies, and he was quite good about it all. So butterflies and books, I mean, other than they both start with B, what's the common element? The common element is the human brain. Inspiration has several phases, and it's important to recognize these, because unless you recognize that this is happening, you may not realize that the implication is that you may be close to a creative idea. So there's a preparatory glow. You say, that's interesting. There's something there, but I can't quite put my finger on it. It's a tickly well-being that banishes awareness of physical discomfort. You just can't think about anything else. Often happens when you're going to sleep or waking up. A forefeeling of what it's going to tell about the thing that you didn't even know you were interested in, much less that you were going to be able to do and devote your life to. But it's that you kind of sense that it's coming. The instant vision that turns into rapid speech. I can't stop talking. I just think this is so fascinating. And a tumble of merging words forming the nucleus of a work which will grow over months and years. This is the nature of the creative process. Jung talked about it as well. He talked about the role of the subconscious, talked about the role of dreams. He talked about free association, integrating opposites, extroversion versus introversion. These are all characteristics of what with some people think is an unproductive life. They are the essence of the creative life, and it's useful to think about them. And as this fellow's name is Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, if you were wondering how do you pronounce that, that's Csikszentmihalyi, and he was at Chicago for a long time and then moved to the West Coast. A brilliant writer and well worth reading. He says, perhaps something isn't right. Someplace there's a conflict, a tension, a need to be satisfied. And let me give you an example of that. This is Alice Aycock. You may not know of Alice. She is a sculptress, and she does sculptures that, if you've been in New York, you may have seen in New York, indeed on Park Avenue. And she was fascinated by nonlinear mathematics, and out of that came this. This is a statue that was on Park Avenue. You can see the Park Avenue buildings on the side. And it wasn't the only thing that she did. She did more like this. You may or may not appreciate this, but you have to say it's creative. I mean, I don't think I've ever dreamed about one of her sculptures, but I sure do enjoy looking at the pictures. Creativity starts with curiosity, as we all know. Ubiquitous interest. There's nothing you're not interested in. Abstraction ability, to take a small fact and explore what it means well beyond the boundaries. This room, by the way, is called a cabinet of curiosities. And these were very popular rooms in the 15th and 16th century, where people just collected stuff from all over the world. They didn't know what it meant. They liked it. They were kind of interested in it, so they put it in a room. And they thought it stimulated their creativity. It may well, not a bad idea. It's about exploring boundaries. Where are the limits? Where do we think the limits are of what we're doing today? And where would we like to go? What assumptions are we making? This is a very subtle art because often we don't realize our assumptions. And then what are the implications of what we're talking about? And what are the flaws in what we're talking about? This is the way we kind of unpack creative ideas and find out what's right about them and what's wrong about them. You have to be open. You have to have a love for ambiguity, and everything doesn't make sense. And in fact, it's the lack of making sense that actually is the heart of it all, and a certain immaturity. Kids, and if any of you still have kids in their single digits, know that that immaturity can often result in really wonderfully creative ideas. So you have to be trained to listen for the small voices. This is not a gimmick, actually. This is real. This is how Britain was detecting airplanes, early airplanes in the 1920s or so, in the First World War. And they thought this fellow thought he could hear much further away with these ear devices, and he probably could, as a matter of fact. We have more sophisticated ways now. Then there's Jean Plensa, and his passion in life is making the invisible visible. Here is an example. If you can see on the left, there's a head there, and that's a real sculpture. That's made out of wires that he's made. Is it there or is it not there? Making the invisible visible. That's really a key aspect of what creativity is all about. Marshall McLuhan talked about it in perhaps cynical ways. He said, I don't know who discovered water, but it wasn't a fish. And I suppose that's true. So just the fact that you're a fish doesn't mean you can discover water. You have to zoom out to see the context of what's going on. You have to zoom out to see that the water is there. Then we have other architectural advances. This is in Sydney, and we see all kinds of these amazing structures that looks like, you know, some sort of invader bug or something that we wouldn't have imagined before. Most of these inspired by mathematics, by the way. So mathematics can inspire enormous bouts of creativity. You have to have associative abilities to do this. Instinctive framework buildings. Psychologically androgynous, meaning neither male nor female. Extroverted and introverted, not one or the other, both. Aggressive and nurturing, both. Sensitive and rigid, both. Dominant and submissive, both. Conservative and risk-seeking, both. Humble and proud, both. These associative abilities, which sound like the opposite, are the starting points for creative thought. Don't toss them out. Revel in them and use them to your advantage. And a sunny pessimism, which is a great phrase that I like. You're optimistic, but you can see what's wrong at the same time. Clues that the near possible may be lurking. Ambiguities, things that don't seem to make any sense, capable of multiple interpretation. That's a good thing, not a bad thing. Illusions, which is distortion of the senses. Paradox, this sentence is false. What do I do with that? Dilemmas, double propositions, riddles and puzzles, questions with double or veiled meanings, conundrums, logical postulations that evade resolution, at least for a time being, and enigmas, mysterious puzzles. These are not bad things. These are good things. These are seeds of creativity. Fallacies, conclusions based on poor reasoning. Revel in these things. Use them to your advantage. It's about bricolage. Bricolage is a word that was invented by Claude Lévi-Strauss in the 20th century and used by John Seely Brown. John Seely Brown was the well-known, famous head of the Xerox Palo Alto Research Center, which was one of the most creative places in the United States for about 40 years. Whenever John was there, he's been a good friend over the years, and he loved this whole idea of bricolage and creativity. Let me show you what bricolage is. Here are a number of ideas, and we'll just label them A's for the time being. There's A4, A6, A12, and so forth. Is there a pattern there? Maybe there's a pattern there. Maybe it's an ellipse. Maybe it's a square. Then we add a few more. It's not going to be an ellipse if those have come into place. And there's another one. What's it doing over there? What does that mean? And then there are more over there. This is starting to look like it has two edges. And then there's one up here, and finally there's one up here. this thing is a triangle, and it has many shapes within it. So that's bricolage. It's the idea of assembling multiple ideas into an overall shape. And that's what you see here. And that's what your jobs are in your businesses in order to make sense out of all these A's in the world to come up with a larger concept. It's the construction of these associative networks. That's a very important part of the creative process. Another question, who designed Brunelleschi's dome? Sounds like a simple question. Well, there's Brunelleschi. The dome was built well after him. It turns out it was named for him. And Brunelleschi says, nor can one say the creative person who starts the creative process. In reality, they are only catalyst for a much more complex process with many participants and many inputs, just as we have described. What are the elements of Brunelleschi's dome? Well, there's herringbone roads in concrete, which came from a concept of Roman roads, which was 1,000 years old by the time this was built. But that pattern of using bricks, not as a road, but as a dome, was part of it. Then the ideas of domes that got lighter and lighter near the top, so the thing didn't crash in on itself, was a very important concept. And that came from the Pantheon, which was also almost a millennium before. So these ideas from the deep, deep past, when assembled, resulted in the concept of the Brunelleschi's dome. Quick setting concrete, light structures, advanced clutches. So these were all parts of this complex, simple, elegant looking dome that comes out. The construction of associative networks. That's what it's all about. You probably recognize this guy, Steve Jobs, one of the most creative guys ever on the planet, said, the companies forget what it means to make great products, Jobs said. The product sensibility and the product genius that brought them to the monopolistic position gets rotted out by people running these companies who have no conception of a good product versus a bad product. They have no conception of the craftsmanship that's required to take a good idea and turn it into a good product. And they really have no feeling in their hearts, usually about wanting to really help the customers. So this is a pretty severe criticism, but all of it is, in my experience, certainly true. So what are modern associative networks? Well, if you take the World Wide Web and put it together with graph theory in a digital library, what do you think you get? Well, you get Larry Page, Terry Winograd, and Sergey Brin. And what do you get when you have those three guys? You get Google. That's where Google came from. Associative networks, putting these things together. And we know this is one of the greatest companies that's ever been conceived. How do you actually do it? 4 steps. First is observe. And that's what you do all day, every day. You reflect. And you may or may not do this all day, every day. And generally, reflection is good at night. We'll talk about it. And then you converse, talk with each other about your observations and your reflections. And then you assemble all these parts, just as we've talked about it. Now, what does this mean specifically? Observing depends on broad search, the periphery, anomalies, paradoxes, direct experience. Observation is an active process. Curiosity leads to collection and curation. That feeds back to more collection and creation, and it spins off creation, and creation stimulates more curiosity. So these are feedback loops that are very, very productive. Use them to your advantage. Collection is about gathering data, creating lists, organizing lists into categories, naming the categories. Naming is very important, as we talked about, structuring the categories and comparing categories to determine conflicts, gaps, errors, puzzles, anomalies, and possible deceptions. It's about the generation of a narrative. So reflection is all those characteristics. It also benefits from sleep, which we've talked a little bit about, but hypnagogic. Hypnagogic is when you have people who have ideas when they're falling asleep. I'm not one of them. I just fall asleep. Then there's hypnopompic. Hypnopompic is the reverse. That's people who have ideas when they're waking up. I am totally hypnopompic. I always have ideas when I'm waking up, and I wake up 3 or 4 times a night. I write down notes and send them to myself. Sleep and collision. Subjects that gained insights the same day, that they had the insight in one day, the same night. That's about 25%. Triggered before sleep and after sleep. That's 60%. 60% of our ideas come during the sleep process. Use it to your advantage. Don't waste this, right? And then you put the ideas together in conversations with others. That's a cell. That's a cell phone. Are they related? Well, that's a good question. What if you had a conversation about cells and cell phones? I'm sure you'd come up with some interesting ideas. And then you assemble them. You build associative hierarchies, draft alternative narratives, classify and category, names, select. So it's a long path to finished innovation for sure. And we call this whole thing ORCA, which stands for observe, reflect, converse, and assemble. So think of this jumping whale when you're trying to think of what did he actually say? Well, he said ORCA. Now, ORCA, what did that mean? And then go back and ask yourself what it meant. ORCA and the art of bricolage. So that's what it's all about. ORCA's process, then the bricolage is people, pace, and leadership. Bob Langer, who you know, famous entrepreneur at MIT, over 40 innovations to his credit, including these 40 companies he started. That's a pretty good record. And this fellow, whose name is Bobby Nijar, used to work for me for a little while, and then went to MIT and worked in Langer's lab. And I challenged him to come up with 100 ideas. And he said, per our conversation Friday, you asked me to send you 100 ideas by yesterday. So far, I only have 11. I'm struggling to come up with additional ones, but I'm still determined to complete this exercise. So he was pretty discouraged. A week or two later, since I sent that email a few hours ago, I gained 13 new ideas. So he's starting to accelerate. I think I'm going in the right direction, so I'm going to keep at it. It's been a while since I thought like this, but I think the rust is slowly wearing off. I'll keep you updated. And then a few days later, I tested 103 ideas. Brainstorming began slow, but ideas started pouring, sometime at the rate of dozens an hour, which is classic. As I was coming up with ideas, my mind already started forming an ontology without me actually physically creating one. As I created the mental ontology, I started thinking about how you can actually treat obesity, because he was obese as a child. I realized it broke down into a few groups. A few days later, he said, over the course of a few days doing this, I started to grab my iPhone from my nightstand and sending myself emails, my e-box, and flagging the ideas. When I woke up the next morning, I responded to the email, expanded it out to a few more sentences, and checked out if the theory was sound. And as a result of these changes, he's starting to be more cognizant of the meta trends around my creativity. I'm starting to log and organize my innovations. The ideas are flooding and they haven't stopped in 2 weeks. This exercise opened and increased my creative output dramatically. So that's ORCA. What should you do? 5 action steps. Begin a list of your ideas today, now. Don't stop until you have 100. Organize them into 4 or 5 categories. Discuss your ideas with your colleagues. Pick one idea to implement and repeat. That's the creative process. It's to associate previously unassociated fields. That's the mechanism to do it. As William James said, it's the highest order of minds. Creativity is the primary measure of our humanity, as Csikszentmihalyi said. And creativity is not an analysis, it's a way of living. So back to the beginning, a brief history of the Western concept of creativity. There's one other object in this painting that perhaps you've already seen, and that's that. Who is that? That's Manet, who painted this painting, and he painted himself into the painting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dick. Thank you indeed. Maybe you want to unshare, stop sharing. A lot of claps.
Yes, stop sharing.
Yeah, just stop sharing. That's it. So we can see
Okay.
everyone.
One
So-
second.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna, once,
Yeah, the house is open for question now. Anybody?
Dick has some questions for me, I think.
I do have some
Yeah,
questions
yeah,
for
yeah.
you.
Okay. Yeah, please
Let
go
me-
ahead, Partha.
Okay. Let me hear from Dick. These
Yeah,
are all
so
the-
I'm
No.
pulling them up here, Partha.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, I thought you were going to ask the questions. So I don't have them right in front of me. They're close by. I don't want to take up time here to search for this. Do you have them in front of you, Partha?
You send me one question, which is a hard one, but I'll try. The question that you wanted me to answer, in view of your experience both in the Eastern and Western hemispheres, how will you think the fundamental messages of my talk will be received in different leadership circles across the world?
Yes, that's a good question.
That's a very good question. And to be honest with you, I've heard you. I think the big message that particularly for the Eastern world, because as you rightly pointed out, you basically reflected on your observations on the Western hemisphere, starting from the Greeks
Right.
all the way to the modern times, and which is right because a lot of the world that we are living in today the innovations have come from the Western hemisphere. There's no doubt about it. Now, when I think of the East, the first country that comes to my mind is indeed Japan, because the messages that you have shared with you and Japan's lack of innovation in the last, let's say, 30, 40 years, after the people like Morita, Hondas, or the people moved away to the next world, I think there's a lot of message. And one of the most fundamental message for Japanese leaders would be what you're making uncommon connections. Japanese way of thinking is very structured, very orderly. It works when you are looking for efficiency. But when you're talking about innovation, the way you presented, I think making uncommon connections, making associations which normally do not associate, I think that's one big message I will take for Japanese leaders. And which is more apparent in China. China has the ability to make uncommon connections. India, you cannot survive unless you make uncommon connections. But there are other aspects which is extremely important where you talked about the bringing the narrative into play. That's where the play begins. Now, Japan is a very, as you know, homogeneous country. And if you rightly you use European examples, multiple languages, multiple cultures, but they all collided with each other to create Michelangelo's, Leonardo da Vinci, the Germans that you mentioned, because they were not only speaking German, they were also speaking Italian and Latin and English and French, and that perhaps helped the creative process. In Japan, it's too homogeneous, it's all Japanese, and that's where I often say when I give talks in India, that India has a strategic advantage if only India can appreciate the local languages in every state. So that's the second message. The third message, I think I loved it very much when you talked about muses, that the importance of dancing and singing, and then connecting that with mathematics. And I recall the dialogue, Dick, which was between Albert Einstein and Rabindranath Tagore in Berlin after Einstein received Nobel Prize. And 2 years earlier, Tagore got the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1913 versus 1915. So Einstein invited Tagore to his home, and the discussion was between art and science. And what Tagore was talking about, the importance of imagination and being able to go beyond, maybe near possible, while Einstein was talking about how to support that with the logic of mathematics. And you brought that out together. And I personally feel that is also very important in the world of, particularly when I talk about the Eastern Hemisphere. There's one place in India where a lot of intellectual ferment happened. It is in Bengal, in between 1750 to 1950. A lot of scientists, a lot of artists, a lot of Nobel Prize winners, a lot of music. And I now feel the reason why it happened there. You touched on it. It was the culture of music, the culture of free thinking, culture of free association, and culture of adversity, because that's where the Britishers ruled. And I think that clearly is something that we have to appreciate. Now, coming to the Western Hemisphere, the message is very clear, and that's happening at MIT, that is happening at Stanford, that's happening in your university, Yale, that people's ability to continuously move from one dimension to the other dimension and make the association. And that's why perhaps in the last 30 years, we have seen 95% of the innovation, if not 99, has come from either from the East Coast or from the West Coast, some in the middle of the country. And I think those are the two areas, lot of that association and de-associations occur. So this would be my answer to your first question. I think you have brought it together, but I think a lot of the messages would be very, very useful, particularly for the Eastern world, India to realize that's that strategic advantage and connect the dots. For Japan to realize it have to become a bit more unstructured and allow a little bit more of free flow of thoughts and make free associations.
Great answers, Partha. I give you an A. In my academic perch, so you get an A on those. I think there's a lot of great insights there, and I think this is a time for India, particularly. I mean, no one can doubt the amount of talent that exists in India, perhaps the greatest reservoir of talent in the world, and then to bring forth more innovation. It could be the century of India without any question.
Okay. Now you asked another question to me, and it is perhaps even more harder. Let me see. I'll try this because I love the question. Many of the examples that I've used to describe creativity and enterprising spirit are largely from Europe. But in the last 50 years, we have not seen any innovation from Europe. What is your perspective how to catalyze the innovative culture in Europe? That's a very good question, Dick. Perhaps you have the answer, but let me take a crack, and then I would like to hear your view. As you know, you and I have spent a lot of time in Europe. If you remember Herb Hensler, Ed Kurbasek, all our colleagues in Germany, and you and I spent a lot of time. I feel what has happened, I think, if you look at the Europe during the Renaissance period, there was a fundamental search to break away from the current structure. Began with the Scottish Enlightenment with John Locke, followed by Leonardo da Vinci's of the world, then came the Rousseaus, and in between there was a continuous fermentation of how to break from quote-unquote monarchies. And the second thing what happened was, because there were multiple cultures, but they were moving from Latin to German, German to English, English to Dutch, that association of typical unassociated languages, the narrative got expanded, the vocabulary got expanded. That has gone now. Now the common language has become English. And there's a certain amount of comfort with the current institutional structures.
Great point.
And that's what we have to bring back. I think there are some Germans online. I could see Paul Grumble is there, a colleague from McKinsey. But that's my read of the place. I want to hear your thoughts.
So I think that's first of all, I think it's a good problem. Second of all, I think it is a here and now problem, a today problem for Europe. And you're seeing it. I mean, so Trump, whether you think positive thoughts about him or not so positive thoughts about him, I mean, he has caused enormous change in Europe, and he's caused Europe to recognize questions that they really haven't recognized before. Germany is taking the leadership. They just had an election that finally got it done, and you're starting to hear some of these concepts. You're seeing that they are already talking about increasing their defense budget, which is, of course, a technology budget. And you see England playing a much greater role than England played a month ago, right? So this is really and France has an election coming up in the next year. So this is a pretty big deal for Europe, and I think it will turn out to be a positive. I don't think every day will be seen as a wonderful day, but I think that it will turn out to be a positive for Europe, and I welcome it. I actually don't think it's a positive for the U.S. I think that President Trump can talk about how Europe has been feeding on the United States, but I got to tell you, we were feeding each other for sure. There's tons of Europeans, there's tons of Asians in the United States. They've made enormous contributions to us, and we start putting up these barriers to this free communication and travel. It's not going to be to anybody's advantage, I think. So I think we're at a very critical juncture right now.
Right, absolutely. And it's basically in support of what you presented this morning, because one of the points takeaways was there has to be a continuous fermentation of ideas from different angles and make some uncommon connections. Now, Europe, after the war, was basically setting down to an order, and there was I think we missed the disorder that is required often to enable innovation. So the third question that you led it is in honor of IIT Kharagpur, so I must raise it. It's a difficult one, but it's a good one. What you are talking about, impressed by the leadership movement that IIT Kharagpur has launched, I believe it is important to speed up the development and movement that you guys have launched across the world, so the fusion of Eastern and Western philosophy that you talk about could be appreciated in line with the cultures in each country. And any thoughts? That's a very good question, Dick. There are a lot of folks from IIT Kharagpur here, but my humble thought would be that clearly the world is looking for a new leadership model. Dick, that's why we talk about Trump, we talk about the failures of many companies to keep up with the innovation. Many companies you and I have served, they do not exist today. Digital being one of them, computer vision with another one. And I think the reason is that people have relied, as you have touched on, too much on order and hierarchy and comfort with assumptions and mathematics and logic of what led to the success, not realizing every success has a short life cycle. And that's the big message I took. So I think what we are trying to do at the Academy of Leadership is bringing the Western approach of decisiveness with the Eastern approach of making associations, and then create the combination of the two to create new leaders of the 21st century. You're right, we have to speed up. We are not moving as fast as we should, but with your support and everyone who has joined us today, I think we could make that movement move forward at a high speed.
Great answer, Partha. Great answers. All great answers.
And we have to invite you to come to Kharagpur. And the last question that you had for me, this is perhaps the most difficult one, but very relevant given the audience. What do you think the three major steps the Indian government and the private sector to move India into the slot of most innovative country of the world? What an endorsement you're making. If India did it, it would change everything, including the necessity of an India-Russia trade agreement. At least it would provide much higher prices for Indian innovation. Russia is certainly no position to innovate in anything, except perhaps bombs, Germany and France. So it is a very big question, very big question. And I'll try to take an answer. I firstly agree with you. Recently, I had the privilege to address the Pan IIT conference in Bombay. It was just about 2 months ago. Well, my basic message was India has got 3 strategic advantages, which is unfortunately recognized but not recognized. One I call the diversity advantage, that the diverse cultures, diverse languages, are we taking advantage of it? Number 2, I call time zone advantage, by which I meant that 70% of India is living in a post-industrial time zone. Because they're poor, they have not yet been affected by air conditioners, cars, and refrigerators. So we have a 70% of the people living in a situation where we can create the new models of the 21st century, as opposed to trying to reject what Europe and America and Japan is trying to reject, because 70% are out of it. And third, I call the Vedic advantage. The Vedic philosophy as an advantage, which talks about harmony with nature, service to humanity, and third, talks about cycles of life. Now, if India could put this package together in view of your presentation, I think you are absolutely right. There's a possibility of India becoming the center of innovation for the world for the 21st century. But India has to first believe in it, because there is a general aura, and I'm not being critical about India, that anything imported is good. If Dick Foster has said it, it is good. If Partha Ghosh said it, same thing, is not as good. I'm being very honest. Same thing. Two of us are sharing. That mentality, if it is a Chanel, if it is some Italian name Armani, it's good fashion. If it is Sabassachi, it is number 2. So that is something that India has to get out of it. And there I would like to end with a quote from Tagore, and you would love it, Dick. He has a quote where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has no broken into fragments by narrow domestic walls. He goes on, and he ends with where the mind is led forward by thee means God, into ever widening thought and actions. And I think India has to really imbibe this spirit. That, Tagore talked about it almost 100 years ago. He got the Nobel Prize in 1913. But people recite, but they're not imbibing it. So India's challenge is how to imbibe its Vedic philosophy and practice it on day to day. So that is my full answer to your question.
Those are great answers. I'm delighted that my questions resulted in such productive answers. I hope you've recorded those answers, because they're all good and they all deserve follow-up.
Well, as you say, good problem solving begins with good questions. So
yes,
I think
always begins with good questions, right?
Yes, and with that, I think we'll pass it over to Commander, who would lead the discussion session with the audience. Commander, is all yours.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Partha. We have 2 hands up. One is from Nitin, but Nitin, you can ask question only if you show your face. You can't hide your face. Nitin,
Yeah.
please go ahead. But put on your video also.
Yourself. Maybe
Okay, Nitin is having some problem. Anit is there. Please go ahead, Anit. Ask your question. Okay, Anit also has raised hand, but he is not asking question.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Taposh, yes, please go ahead. Yeah,
Hello.
Anit. Yeah.
Yes.
Show your face also, please.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
I can hear you, but show your face. We want to see you smiling. Your video is still not on. Please go ahead, otherwise. Okay. Please go ahead. Yes, Anit, please go ahead. Okay. Some problem? Fine. Okay. Let me ask them that question, Dave. In the
Hello.
yeah, please go ahead, Anit.
He's not
Please
connected.
go
Can you
ahead.
hear me?
Yeah, please go ahead. Some more innovation is required in this, looks like.
Microsoft team is always a issue. Anupam, can you do something?
Okay, it's okay.
He's
Come ahead.
unmuted, but I don't know whether why sound is not
Can
coming.
you? Could you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes,
Please
now
go
it is
ahead.
clear.
Nate, please go
Please
ahead.
Okay. Sorry, yeah, I can just hear you now. Yes. So I just
Yeah, please go ahead.
make a quick question. Is that okay?
Yeah, please say.
Okay, he stops. Okay.
Can't hear you. Okay, fine. Okay. Richard,
Hello.
yeah, please go ahead.
Why you go ahead? Why you?
No, looks like you have some
Okay.
problem with your system. Yeah. Okay. Otherwise,
Never mind. Sir, carry on.
yeah. Okay. Now, in one of the slides, in the beginning, you showed one astronomy mechanism in one of the
Yes.
slides.
Yeah.
Now, the word was antrixtra. Now, that word is derived from antriksh mechanism. Antriksh is a Sanskrit word for the cosmos,
Aha.
where you do the astronomy studies
Right.
and all that.
And Tiki Thera,
So I was
right.
very delighted at exactly Sanskrit word, 100%, antriksha. So little bit minor change. So what Partho said, our Vedic philosophy has got a lot of knowledge in that. And I invite you to India. Earlier I said for 2 weeks. Now I am inviting you for 2 months.
2 years. 2
You
years.
got to see a lot of things. The architecture you mentioned about the modern architecture of so many places, the so-called creative architecture. If you come to this country, you will be amazed. The temples which were made 2000 years back,
Yeah.
2000 years back, still standing and beautiful. Whether it's
My wife has
architecture
been
or the
several
paintings.
times, right?
Yeah. So you are welcome for 2 months now to India and study. Okay. Anybody? Squera, Lara, you want to ask some question? Yeah, please go ahead. Please go ahead. Laura, Natalia.
You can go ahead. Just speak.
No, you don't want? You had raised your hand. Your hand is up. Okay, fine. Cool. Taposh Kumar Maithi, you want to ask some question?
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Hello?
we can hear you. Yeah, please go ahead.
I'm asking that is creation and creativity is same? Creation and creativity, action and activity. Actions spontaneously come out or creativity spontaneously come out from our human being? Creation and creativity.
Yeah. So I'm not entirely sure I understand the question, but I'll tell you this: they are part and parcel of one another. You can't. You don't be creative one day and then implement the next day. That's not the nature of the process. Everything is going on simultaneously, and moving forward sometimes, moving backwards other times, moving sideways. But you have a mental image of what you're trying to do. And hopefully we covered that in the early part. You need to have a concept of what you're doing. So when the laser was invented, was it invented perfectly in the first day? Not remotely, right? But was there a little something that said, oh, 90% of what we're doing is wrong, but 10% is right. Let's follow the 10%. And then 15 years later, you have functioning, really impressive lasers that opens up whole new areas of commerce for us. AI, everybody says, oh, AI is so cool. It's amazing what we've accomplished in 2 years. We didn't accomplish that in 2 years. We accomplished it in 60 years, right? AI goes back 60 years. And I know some of the people that were starting and doing it at that time. They were just graduated grad students who were looking for something interesting to do. and they sure found it, you know. And by the way, I think that's going on all over at least all over the United States. I'm pretty familiar with Europe, but not as familiar as I am with the United States. But when you go out west and talk to these folks, or you know, we have 9 major hospitals in New York. Is there hospital innovation going on in New York? You betcha, right? But you really have to be on the inside to have a sense of what it is. But it's very robust. So you know, we talk about what's going to happen now and what's going to, and everybody's fascinated with AI. And now you increasingly hear people pushing quantum. I happen to think it's a little bit too early to push quantum. And after all, we've been after quantum for 70 years at this point. So I think quantum will come along, but I think other things will come along too. And I thought the point about Japan was an extremely good point. Japan is a homogeneous society. They get along extremely well. They had their glorious era in the 70s and early 80s. And then their unity and their precision held back innovation. So you know, they have definitely underproduced relative to their population on innovation, and their population is getting older and older and older. So Japan is a real problem, and I think, you know, it's too bad someone from Japan is not here, because they should really put together a program to do something about it. So sorry, I'm not sure I've answered your question. I'm sure I've talked a lot.
Okay, Squirrel Lara, I think you are unmuted now.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So thank you so much for your presentation. My question is, based on your presentation, the core processes start with observation, and sometimes it's not easy to do observation when it's not clearly you're looking for. So what kind of activities, what kind of pre-activities do we need to start observing what we should be observing?
Right. So this is an absolutely great question, and everything you said is correct. You have to start with questions. That's curious. I wonder why that is, right? And by the way, it's perfectly legitimate for you. In fact, I think it would be, let me give those who want an assignment. Here's the assignment. I want you to write down on the next 2 days 100 questions that you have. Don't try to answer them. Just write down 100 questions. And then I want you to sit back on day 3 and day 4 and look at them and which are the most important, because they're not all equally important. I will guarantee you that, right? So pick out the 5 that are most important and then say, well, why can't I answer that question? And if you can't answer the question, just put it aside and go to the next one, right? Don't ask yourself questions you can already answer. That's not a useful exercise. But just overproduce, because you have to push yourself to the wall to get to the right questions. You can't sit back and say, I'm going to ask a really good question now, ask one and think that you've got something. It just doesn't work that way. No, you know, you have to put too many things together. So put together your list of 100 questions. And by the way, I think it would be a great idea for those of you who know each other to exchange your 100 questions with each other and say, here's what was on my mind, what's on your mind, and then go back and forth. The creative potential of this group has to be enormous, absolutely enormous, right? And so that's an interesting idea. How do we get that financed? Okay, that's a good question. Let's figure out how we get it financed, right? And then on and on and on, right?
Thank you.
I hope that was helpful.
Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah, I see one hand going up. Please go ahead. Taposh, you had it, I think, yes. Anit,
Yeah.
are you okay?
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
is-
we
is
can
the
hear you. Yes,
audio
please go ahead.
issue resolved?
Yes, please go ahead.
James is on. James is there.
Yeah, Anit is going. Yeah.
Sir, I just wanted to get your thoughts on. I see you've been analyzing companies, etc. I just wanted to get your thoughts on commodities and wholesale commodities and branded commodities. Is there a place in between where India could actually probably flourish? Something like goods and pickles and milk and salt and tea and meat and herbals and but not branded and not quintals of commodities, but somewhere in middle. So because there's a vast ecosystem here, so I just wanted to get your thought on to try to get some value out of plain packaging, non-retail, non-wholesale models, and general commodities in general from an Indian perspective.
Well, thank you for the question. I will acknowledge in front of this entire group that I know absolutely nothing about that subject. And I find it hard enough to talk about things that I actually think I know about. And so I try to stay away from things I don't know about. So I'm going to thank you for your question. And the honest answer is I can't answer I don't have a thoughtful value added answer to your question.
Dick, let me take a crack at that
Good.
as your co-pilot, if I may use the term. I think the answer is, of course, yes. But the key here again is whatever you choose, commodity, uncommodity, something in between, we have to find how to innovatively package it, promote it, and bring it to the world so the world could appreciate both the economic and non-economic value for which that product would shine on the global stage. So that's exactly what happened with chocolate, which, by the way, comes from a small country called Switzerland. They packaged the chocolate, the choco, which comes from Africa. So unless we can demonstrate that kind of creativity, which Dick is talking about, by making unassociated connections between pickles and sandesh, if we can make the two connections, though it may sound, how could you connect a sweet with a pickle? But think about it. If we can do it, there would be products and value propositions and brands will get created. That's my humble, quick answer to that question.
Important question.
Yeah. James.
Khurana sir, please go ahead. General Khurana sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dick, for a very enlightening presentation. I have a question that I don't want to sound biased, but very justifiably, all the thoughts that you projected about innovation, creativity, were mostly from the Western world for obvious reasons. It's not that there's no intellectualism in the rest of the world, but there were resources available to them to pursue those ideas. Now, if I go back to Indian civilization, I think innovation has been one of the major strengths that India possessed in various fields. But they were at a level which was localized. Even today, there is a particular thing called jugaad. The word is jugaad in India, that you can produce anything out of anything. And I, being an army general, I would just like to give you an idea. We were fighting the war in '65 with Pakistan. And we were going through one of the villages with our tanks. And a villager comes up to me when we were having a little break. He says, how much does this tank cost you? So at that time, the tank was about 10 crores. What will it be? $1.5 million in the current terms, Partha? $1.5 million?
Yeah. Right.
So he said, then what happens if you get one shot? I said, gets shot up and blows up because we got ammunition. He said, what if I give you 10 tanks in 1 crore each? Because it's going to take one shot. You will have 10 tanks. I'm just giving you the thought process that we Indians have. But, and here is my question to you, sir. We find that the innovation, creativity needs support. Support, intellectual support, as you called it, the communication support, association support, and financial support. And that's where I not only talk about India, but most of the countries like India, there is no dearth of innovative ideas. So my point to you would be, and to Partha, that can we have a system like you find a lot of Nobel Prize being given jointly to people? you don't find Indians over there or East Asian or Asians over there generally. Can we have a system where ideas being developed in countries like India, which probably they're not supported here enough because of various constraints, that they could be a bank of such ideas put together, communications, associations, collaborations, and developed into an innovation? Thank you.
Well, so my quick answer to that is there has to be an absolutely great answer. You can't have the population that India has and not have really tremendous potential for innovation. I think that the you have so many people. So there are three parts, the three key parts to innovation. First is the innovator, obviously. Second is the customer, which people tend to not spend enough time on. You really have to understand who those customers are and what their implicit needs are. And then there's financing, and those are the venture capitalists. A lot of people think that innovation is about venture capital. And of course it is. I mean, everybody needs money. But before that, you have to have a great idea. You just can't throw money at ideas. That's not the way it develops. As you've seen, at least in my view, this is a very complicated process having these ideas. So you have to start with that. Now, my guess is that with the enormous population that India has, there are already many, many centers of extremely smart people. And perhaps they can't see their way clear to how they're going to get the money, and that stops them from asking the basic questions. Start with the customer. Who is your customer? What is your product good for, right? Who is it good for? And work that through and get good answers to that. If you get good answers to that, you will find finance, and you will find finance in India, I am sure, right? But if you go to finance, you're just basically asking people who are never going to have that idea to come up with an idea, and they're not going to do it. They'll tell you what they have in their current agenda. So go to the potential entrepreneurs, and you have hundreds of, you have to have millions of potential entrepreneurs in China. And I'd start with IIT. What is IIT doing to encourage innovation and entrepreneurship? Now, my guess is quite something. I don't know what it is, but I'd sure like to know what it is. And the potential for India to do this is enormous, right? So I think it's a great question. Thank you very much for the question. I'm sorry I don't have a more specific answer, but it is. I would focus less on the money, because I guarantee you that will come, and focus more on the entrepreneurs. Whereas an IIT there has to be 1,000 there that are having great ideas. So I'd
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, last question from Babul.
I think
Please, Babul,
James.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I
Last
think
question.
obviously, I think there's a paucity of time. So I just wanted to, I heard everyone. So my question is that, I mean, unless we have an education system which actually actively promotes, innovation, rather than, the marking and all that stuff. So I think we are not going to make any headway, because obviously in a young mind, like somebody has said, that, when the mind is very young, where you can actually mold it. So unless we drive that culture extremely hard, right at, infancy, I don't think we will be in a position to actually, drive it going forward. So, there's a transformational change which is required in the educational system to be able to drive it hard. So what's your, thoughts on that?
Well, so I appreciate your cautions. I think they're well taken. And I'm thinking about this for the first time in the last 15 minutes. So don't. I'll think about it more and talk to Partha. But my instinct, not knowing nearly enough about India, is to start with IIT. And I'd like to know what IIT is doing on this area right now, because I'm sure it's something. And then I'd like to have an opportunity to look at that, judge it, and maybe critique it a little bit. And because if you don't have the entrepreneurs, everything else is a waste of time. If you go back to the early 1960s, even late 50s, and ask how many venture capital companies were in the United States at that time, the answer is about 4, right? There was the Rockefeller family that was putting some money in. There was a French professor at Harvard Business School named George Doriot, who was a general in the Second World War, and he built a company called American Research and Development, which did quite well for 25 years, and then got sold, and the magic was gone. So and that was it. There was maybe 1 or 2 others. There were probably 3 or 4 others actually, but it wasn't more than 3 or 4 others, right? So that was in the 50s and 60s. It's inconceivable that India is not in a far better position than that to move forward. By the way, as I understand the economic situation, you do a lot of trade with Russia. There is no possibility that Russia is going to innovate on anything. 0. So you have a huge market there once you understand, and I'm sure you do understand the market. You have a competitor to the east. I think its name is China. And by the way, they started to try and innovate in the late 40s, right? And it wasn't until maybe 2 months ago that they really got their act together. And they seem to be getting their act together now. Not that they didn't try. They did try for the last 15 years or so. And it was okay, but it wasn't great. Now it looks like they've got a tiger by the tail, and they're really moving. So expect it to take a long time. Study what China did and ask what of that is useful, if anything, for us. But your innovation efforts are not going to be successful unless you have big customers. So start with that. What can we bring? What can we bring to the major Indian companies? What do they need that they don't know that they need? Don't start out saying, we're going to repeat the American successes in innovation in the 1950s, because you'll all be dead by the time that ever happens. So
See, that's part of the subject. A lot of thinking is what we could import from outside. Let's import James. James, you want to raise a question, right?
Sure, if that's okay. Thanks very much for the wonderful presentation, Dick. It was very, very, very inspiring. I guess my question sort of follows along the line of the last few questions, which is I've been in quite a few different universities and quite a few different corporations, VC firms, consulting companies, things like that. And everyone for at least the last 30 years has been talking about the importance of interdisciplinarity, multidisciplinarity, breaking down the silos. And I think that's an excellent point. I'm also always impressed by the everyday innovations in creativity. Whether you're a plumber, a car mechanic, a physicist, people have lots of good ideas. And it seems to me I've never found a university or a company that does a good job of sort of pulling those people together, nurturing innovation from within, not with money or not with structure, and I'm not even sure what the right mechanism might be. Maybe it's, parties every Friday night or something. But I just wonder if you have any thoughts on ways that leaders more broadly could be fostering and nurturing innovation. I know Google tries with their 10% or whatever it is of your time can go, et cetera. But I'm wondering if you have any kind of broader general ideas for what leaders could be doing to kind of foster interdisciplinary innovation, I guess would be my question.
Dick, one moment before you answer, let me introduce James. James is a good friend, and he owns an idea lab at the Fletcher School. Yeah.
Oh, so this is a loaded question.
No, it's not. It's not really. I don't know. I'm trying to figure out ways myself. I don't think I've found good ones, but I've never been at a university that has anything close to something that supports innovation. Ironically, right? I mean, the universities have really become kind of these very siloed places, and for obvious reasons, right? They only want to hire people who are leaders and experts with a deep record and a clear trajectory. But I'm just wondering if you have any suggestions for better ways of doing that kind of interdisciplinary innovation from a leadership perspective.
So it's a very good question, and the honest answer is I don't have enough facts to know. So I think it's a great question. I will continue to think about it because I think you're talking about exactly the right thing. However, that being said, a lot has come out of MIT, and that's not by accident, right? And they're going after it. I've known some of the most senior people there for quite some time, and that it's what they eat, breathe, and live, right? Stanford is another example, and I think they've had tremendous success. Of course, they've been in California. On the other hand, you could say, well, they're in California because the innovation started in California with Hewlett and all those guys. I'm quite close to the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana, and they're working on this, and they're doing a whole series of things, which basically I think is focused. I think it's fair to say, and I think if they were on the line, I'd still say it, is focused on getting government funding for innovative projects. That's different from starting a company, right? And I understand that, and that's fine, and I don't have any problem with that. So that's another area I'd look at. Do you know of the Creative Destruction Laboratory?
Not well, no. The name sounds familiar, but I'll say no.
Okay. So the Creative Destruction Laboratory was started in 2011 or so at the University of Toronto, and they had what their idea was: we're going to bring together people in September. We'll bring together, let's say, 20 people. 15 of them will be better than the 5 of them will be worse. We'll ask the 5 to leave. We'll bring them the 15 together again in November. 12 of them will be good. We're going to ask 3 to leave. We'll bring the 12 together again in March and rinse and repeat until June, when they're down to about 5 or 6 people. That actually worked quite well, giving them a 9-month period of time where they could continue to talk with outsiders who had some idea about something and could evolve their ideas over time. And they had a little bit of money in order to spend. That program that started out with 20 or 25, this year, coming this September, I don't know what the real number will be, but it'll be something like 1,500. It's really come into something. Now, in addition to the Creative Destruction Laboratory, it turns out other people like this idea as well. And I just recently saw a list of 100 of these similar kinds of organizations in the United States. So it's, and if I could find that list, and I'm not sure I can, but I saw it in the last few days, maybe there's a chance. It's a good idea to go through that list because this is becoming a movement. And we'll see what Trumponomics has to say about this, and that's not at all clear. But there is potential there. There's no question.
Thank you. I think Professor Manada, we can go ahead with vote of thanks now.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Richard Foster. It's a wonderful lecture and an illuminating one. The topic was history of the concept of creativity, and I saw you added 2 words. One is before history, a brief, and another one before concept is mostly Western, because what you said that it will take a couple of maybe months or something to discuss the whole gambit of the beautiful, wonderful this area of creativity. You also added this small definition, but very interesting one, is creativity magic of near possible. Wonderful word. I mean, that is the crux of the whole thing, is that reaching to a near impossible thing, which most of the common people will lack. We think that the impossible cannot be made possible kind of thing. And your whole lecture has inspired us to go towards, or rather to reach this near possible things. It's a wonderful one. And then you talked about the entrepreneurships. Yeah, with this kind of concepts and ideas and thoughts kind of things, when somebody does something and then the market is required, but this thing will be sold. And also, while inventing something, always the inventor does not know how it will be used, because I listened to the lecture of Steve Jobs. You said the Steve Jobs one, and that was the commencement lecture 2005 delivered at Stanford University. He talked about three things. One is the calligraphy. He learned at Reed College, and because he dropped out from Reed College, which was so expensive, and his parents could not afford it. So he just went to the Reed College calligraphy, and Apple made this beautiful fonts, which Windows simply copied it. That's what Steve Jobs said. Steve Jobs did not know that calligraphy will be so important thing. So inventor many times really do not know how his invention will be important. Then he made Apple, and then he got fired from Apple. Also, the inventor went, and then he said that still the fire is in the belly, and he made that Pixar kind of thing, and all these things are there. So, I mean, all your lectures, throughout those lectures, how the history of creativity has taken its shape, right from 5000 BC to the, and you said the 19th century is probably that century, which was mostly a creative one, with the examples of all those great artists and scientists like this one. So it is a wonderful lecture, and I must thank Dr. Ghosh, Dr. Partha Ghosh, because the moment Dr. Partha Ghosh was referring to Dr. Richard Foster, I requested Dr. Partha Ghosh, of course, with a very short duration time, and we had he arranged Dr. Richard Foster, to deliver this this evening lecture. So thank you, Dr. Ghosh, for this. And thank you, Dr. Richard Foster. Thank you, Commander Jetli, and all the participants. We really enjoyed this lecture tonight, and of course, the morning to you also in the United States. So thanks all of you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Dick.
Thank you.
Dick.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're ended, Partha?
Yeah, you can end it. Just leave. But thank you, Dick. It was absolutely wonderful.
Wonderful. Talk soon. Thank you.
See you in India now. See you in India.
Yeah.